Sunshine Cathedral is a different kind of church, where the past is past and the future has infinite possibilities. This is the day our God has made.
A story about the prophet Elijah. Elijah challenged the people. How long are you going to sit on the fence? If the God of our ancestors is the real God, follow our God. If it's Baal, follow Baal. Make up your minds. Nobody said a word. Nobody made a move. Then Elijah said, I'm the only prophet of God left in Israel, and there are 450 prophets of Baal. Let the Baal prophets bring up 2 oxen. Let them pick one, butcher it, and lay it out on the altar of firewood, but don't ignite it. I'll take the other ox, cut it up, and lay it on the wood, but neither will I light the fire. Then you will pray to your gods, and I'll pray to mine. The God who answers with fire will prove to be, in fact, the true God. All the people agreed. A good plan. Do it. So the prophets of Baal took an ox, prepared it for the altar, then prayed to Baal. They prayed all morning long, "Oh Baal, answer us." But nothing happened, not so much as a whisper of breeze. Desperate, they jumped and stomped on the altar they had made. By noon, Elijah had started making fun of them, taunting, "Call a little louder. Maybe Baal has gotten involved in a project or is on vacation. Perhaps Baal is a late sleeper and needs to be awakened." They prayed louder and louder, cutting themselves with swords and knives, a ritual common to them, until they were covered in blood. This went on until well past noon. They used every religious trick and strategy they knew to make something happen on the altar. But nothing happened, not a flicker of response. Then Elijah told the people, "Enough of that, it's my turn, gather around." And they gathered. He then put the altar back together, for by now it was in ruins. Elijah took 12 stones, one for each of the tribes of Jacob, the same Jacob to whom God had said, "From now on, your name is Israel." He built the stones into the altar in honor of God. Then Elijah dug a fairly wide trench around the altar. He laid firewood on the altar, cut up the ox, put it on the wood, and said, "Fill 4 buckets with water and drench both the ox and the firewood." Then he said, "Do it again." And they did it. Then he said, "Do it a 3rd time." And they did it a 3rd time. The altar was drenched, and the trench was filled with water. When it was time for the sacrifice to be offered, Elijah the prophet came up and prayed, "O God, God of our ancestors, make it known right now that you are God in Israel, that I am your servant, and that I am doing what I'm doing by your authority. Answer me, God. Oh, answer me and reveal to this people that you are God, the true God." Immediately the fire of God fell and burned up the offering, the wood, the stones, the dirt, and even the water in the trench. All the people saw it happen and fell on their faces in awed worship, exclaiming, "This is the true God. This is the true God." In these human words, God's voice is heard.
Thanks be to God. Elijah rock, shout, shout. Elijah rock, coming up, Lord. Elijah rock, shout, shout. Elijah rock, coming up, Lord. Elijah rock, shout, shout. Elijah rock, coming up, Lord. Elijah rock, shout, shout. Elijah rock, coming up, Lord. Elijah rock, shout. shout, shout. Elijah Rock, come up, Lord.
Please join me in the spirit of prayer. Let us dwell together in peace. And let us not be instruments of our own or others' oppression. And now may God's word be spoken. May only God's word be heard. Amen. Well, I was remembering fondly today my days in the Ziegfeld Follies. And oh, I'm well preserved. But something's missing. Something's missing. It doesn't feel quite right yet. Oh, here we go. There we go. All right. That'll work. All right. There's an old magical incantation meant to give power to those going into battle, especially on cold autumn Friday nights. It was a cheer we chanted at pep rallies and ball games some 30 plus years ago. The cheerleaders at my high school would lead the cheer. They would shout out in the gym at the pep rallies or up in the stands for the games. They would shout out, "Let's get fired up." Wow. And then the response would be from the band, I was in the band, from the band and the pep squad and the sports fans, the response would be, "We are fired up. Let's get fired up. We are fired up." It would be like that, just on and on and on. And so they would say it, and the more we get it, the more it builds. Let's get fired up. We are fired up. 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 Let's get fired up. More fired up. Let's get fired up. Let's get fired up. Let's get fired up. Like that. So, now, in the Bible story today that we heard, the cheerleader, known in biblical parlance as a prophet, the cheerleader, Elijah, is doing just that. He's pumping up the adrenaline. He's pumping up the morale. He's being the cheerleader, getting people fired up. Now, the story plays fast and loose with physics. And that's fine, because when you're the storyteller, be creative. I mean, don't tell some boring little factual story. But the storyteller is super creative with the physics of the world. But the story isn't about weather. And the story isn't about combustion. The fire in the story is a metaphor for firing up the community. The story also shows us how when we reduce religion to a means of gaining political influence or personal privilege, or when we use it as a competition, we can take religion in some pretty disturbing directions. We have competing religious communities in this story. And they are each today insisting that they each have a lock on divine power, and that they have a direct and exclusive access to cosmic forces. They are each the one true way to peace and paradise. There is only one true church, and I'm surprised at how many dozens of them there are. When I've heard from my Mormon friends that it's them. I've heard from my Catholic friends and relatives that it's them.
I heard, and there were these little churches in the South when I was growing up called Churches of Christ. They know it's them. Oh, they are very certain. And so that they have the way. They have the truth and the power. They have the roadmap. And no one else does. It's just them, whoever they are. We have the key, and no one else has a clue. When that is the message, be mindful. I'm not saying they don't believe it 100%. I'm not saying they don't mean well. I'm not saying that they aren't trying to do good, but I'm saying just because they love selling it doesn't mean we have to buy it. I have the full gospel. Well, you've got your piece of it, and I'm glad it's working for you, but maybe there's lots of ways to come at this. Every religious path, of course, believes it has something useful, some useful insight, some special gift. I think our brand of religion is pretty special. I love it. I want you to love it. I'm peddling it as hard as I can for anyone who feels encouraged or enthused by it, but I can love it and share it without thinking that only us get to be loved by God. I get to say, this is how we have a good time. This is how we explore truth and meaning. This is how we have discovered what is true for us at certain points of our journey. And I can do all of that and still learn from my Buddhist friends, and my Muslim friends, and my Jewish friends, and my Baha'i friends, and so on. And so, yes, I think we're something special, and we have something to offer, but so do other people. And so rather than competing with them, I'm stealing from them to make our stuff even better. And so, just remember that, yeah, we're all proud of our tradition, and some of us are more contemplative, some of us are going to love the quietness of a Quaker service, and some of us are going to love the enthusiasm of a Pentecostal service, and some of us are going to love the ritual of high church Anglicanism or the Eastern Orthodox tradition. We're going to love all kinds of things. But when we turn our faith experience into a zero-sum game, people get hurt, and hearts get broken. And we are meant to be in the heart-mending business, not the heart-breaking business. Neither Elijah nor the priests of Baal are making their faith traditions very proud in today's story. In their posturing and chest thumping, both sides look petty and pugnacious. The God of my understanding can beat up the God of your understanding is a silly but still oft-repeated sentiment to this day. There are clues that the child-sacrificing cult of Moloch was actually the cult of Baal by another name. Baal means boss or owner. And to reflect the patriarchal culture, another word it could mean was husband. Isn't that funny? It means boss, owner, or husband. Wonder who picked that name. So, in any case, it's a boss, it's the owner, it's the person who really gets to call all the shots. That's Baal. And to satisfy Baal, the boss, people would have to make sacrifices. He was a fertility god, and a god of the harvest, and a god of war, and a god of storms, which is why it's funny that the storm god can't rain fire. That the storm god can't create a storm when called upon. And so this boss of weather, this boss of storms, this boss of war, this boss of fertility, this boss owns everything. This boss owns sex. This boss owns the crops. This boss owns the winds and the weather. This boss owns us, if you're in the cult of Baal. And to satisfy the boss, people would make sacrifices. Maybe even their children. Now, if we were to read more of this story, we'd find out that the queen of the region, the queen was a member of the cult of Baal. Jezebel, she'd married into the royal family, and she was a zealot in the cult of Baal. Oh, she was a Baalist fundamentalist. She knew the cult of Baal was the one true way. And not only was it just the one true way for her, and not only was it the one true way for her to try to persuade people to consider for their lives, it was the one true way, and she could now use her political influence to enforce it on other people. That the cult values, the values and the ideology of the cult of Baal, that would influence the government, how we run things. People, whether they were part of our cult or not, would have to respect it and privilege it and let us have our way with things, we in the cult of Baal. I'm talking about the Bible and ancient history, nothing today, of course. I'm talking about the story of Elijah. And so Jezebel wanted her version, her understanding of her religion to be something that everyone had to live by. She wanted a world where her religion was dominant and people could be sacrificed to make sure her ideology reigned supreme in ancient history. Now, Elijah is a prophet of Yahweh. Now, Yahweh in the story is different from Baal. We don't always treat Yahweh as if Yahweh is different from Baal. A lot of times we act as if they're the same. But the story of Yahweh is different than the story of Baal. Yahweh isn't a person. Yahweh isn't a boss. Yahweh is a presence. Yahweh doesn't have power over us. Yahweh is all power. And it operates through us. And we are always in its presence. And we are part of it. Not a power over, but a power with. Not a being, but pure being itself, the ground of being, the I am, the isness of life, that in which we live and move and have our being. When Moses says, "Who shall I say sent me?" and the answer is, say Yahweh, say I am that I am who I am who I will be. Say I am sent you. That is actually saying I am unnameable. Who shall send you? That which is so pervasive, it doesn't even have a name. Names separate us, but this is an omnipresence. I am that I am. I am the I am. I am the allness. I am the isness. I am the power and the presence that you are always part of. That's what Yahweh is. Yahweh is the great I am. So today's myth about this pyrotechnic show going on between Elijah and the Baalist priest, today's myth challenges us. But it's not a challenge that we demand the sky gods rain fire, and if we're on the right team, the magic will work. No, the myth is to challenge us to get fired up about a more loving, more inclusive, more healing understanding of God. Especially in a time when God's name is used in vain so frequently to create chaos and confusion and separation. If anyone is caged in the name of God, we are worshiping Baal and not Yahweh. If anyone is separated by walls instead of invited to an open table, we are dealing with Baal and not Yahweh. If anyone says that they can't even come here because of how they worship, that is the cult of Baal, not the experience of Yahweh. And so the myth is to challenge us. How are we going to understand the divine? How are we going to understand the one power and the one presence? Are we going to reduce it to a Baalist sort of boss in the sky who may or may not answer our pleas? Or are we going to let God be this omnipresence of love which does not, and cannot reject anyone because we are all part of it. We are all part of the great I am. Is God anger and violence and greed and cruelty and fear? Or is God love and mercy and joy and peace and kindness? And we get to decide how we will experience the divine, how we will talk about it, how we will seek it, how we will share it. We are made in the divine image. And so the God that we summon, the God that we understand, the God that we are with this moment, and our understanding will grow as we grow, but as long as we are intentional about it being good and loving and gracious and inclusive, as long as that's what God is for us, that's what we are going to become. We are made in the image of God, and so it matters what our image of God is, because that's what we're becoming. If our God is petty and vile and tribal and vengeful, we're not going to be better than our God. But if our God is love, if our God is omnipresent goodness, if our God is justice love, if our God is goodness and mercy and compassion, that's what we're growing into, and that's what the survival of our world depends on. We are free to embrace either the Baal understanding or the Yahweh ideal. And the writer seems to believe that the Yahweh ideal is the more empowering, more healing choice. Now, let's don't get too smug about it. Yeah, we know the Yahweh ideal is better. God is omnipresence. God is love. God is all there is. I'm part and parcel of God. I'm God's miracle and not God's mistake. There's not a spot where God is not. There's good for me and I ought to have it. Yay, us! Hooray for our side! Yahweh was Elijah's affirmed understanding of the divine. Yahweh he was a prophet of Yahweh. And yet, even though he believes and serves Yahweh, he is using Yahweh like a parlor trick to embarrass his enemies. Elijah, dude, you got to do better. And after he succeeds in humiliating his enemies, he then orders his opponents killed. Elijah, you have 100% now drifted over into Baal's lane. And then the queen, remember her? She's part of the Baal religion, and she's mad that he's killed her priest, so now she's ordered a hit on him, and he has to go into hiding. It's a whole thing. It's an ugly mess. That can't be what was meant to be. All of that confusion and chaos. And so, yes, we know that God is love, but we forget. Because love is sometimes hard, because love means healing, and love means forgiveness, and love means growth, and love means change, and love means moving forward, and sometimes we just rather not. And so, yes, Elijah has crossed into Baal's lane, but we can't be too critical because we all do. We all cross into Baal's lane. But here's the good news. Even when we fall short of our ideals, we can still return to them. We can choose to have a shift in consciousness. We can remember that we are in God and part of God, and that we are expressions of God, and that God is love. Say that with me. God is love. Whenever you're angry, whenever you're afraid, whenever you don't know what to do, whenever you're beating yourself up, whenever you want to beat up someone else, just remember that one little phrase. God is love. And so, yes, some of us were in the Baal cult, and some of us want to make Yahweh into Baal every once in a while. And yes, we shift in and out of our lanes, but the religious path isn't always getting it right. It's always coming back. It's always coming back and getting back on track. And so we can always re-embrace our ideals and start again. We're farther along than we had been, and now we can start from where we are and do better still. So today, let's get fired up. We are fired up. Let's get fired up, not for battle, not for competition, but let's get fired up for living lives of hope and peace and love and joy. That's holy fire, and this is the good news. Amen.
That Arizona sky burning in your eyes. You look at me and babe, I wanna catch on fire. It's buried in my soul like California gold. You found the light in me I couldn't find. So when I'm all choked up and I can't find the words, every time we say goodbye, baby, it hurts. When the sun goes down and the band won't play, I'll always remember us this way. Lovers in the night, poets trying to write. We don't know how to rhyme, but that's alright. But all we this way.